Hi friends, we are going to learn about dinosaurs today. Yes, we are. Get ready. First off, we've got in the history of critters that we've discovered fossils for. Leading up to the dinosaurs, we had the Devonian period a long time ago, 410 to 360 million years ago. Excuse me. And how do we know what lived then? Fossils. Pretty much all marine life. So fish, big fish, small fish, other kind of critters, anything that could leave a fossil. So anything that pretty much had a skeleton could leave a fossil. Any of those soft-bodied critters probably didn't make the fossil record. So there could have been a lot more in the Devonian period than what we think, but it just didn't get fossilized. So a couple of land critters started to come about during the Devonian period, but mainly we saw this guy go from sea to land. He's called a tetrapod, and you're going to learn more about him in AP biology. But what was cool about this guy is his name was Tiktaalik, and he was kind of a fish that could also walk on its front limbs, kind of like a mud puppy, but a little bit bigger. He was a couple of feet long. So he didn't have fins like a fish. He had a skeleton like this guy right here with arms that could do almost a push-up, and that's how we know he probably walked on land. So kind of an interesting critter, Tiktaalik, which was discovered only about 20 years ago, the fossil of this guy. So he was kind of a little bit of an intermediary between marine life and land life. We're going to then jump to the Carboniferous period as we go crazy on land with all kinds of plants, all kinds of land animals, and that was 359 to 299 million years ago. So we have lots of four-legged critters. Those are called tetrapods. We also have our first amphibians, our first reptiles, and what was cool about this period is we see in the fossil record that the amphibians were able to lay their eggs on land. So that's kind of cool. So once you have a hard shell, you can live out and land and not be what we call desiccated or dried out. So we had lots of cool critters in the fossil record during the Carboniferous period. That was a long, long time ago. And then, boom, everything left the fossil record. So was there a mass extinction? According to the fossil record, that's what we see, where about 83% of everything that was living, plants, animals, you name it, it just stopped. No more in the fossil record. And when we did our lab with the relative dating, and you looked at remember the Bobana, Fofana fossil and all that kind of thing? All right, so that's the same deal that we were looking at here. We saw one fossil layer that had a ton of stuff in it and all kinds of critters. And then the next one up, the more recent one, most of the things had died out. So we think some kind of mass extinction happened. Dinosaurs weren't around yet. So this was another extinction before the dinosaurs happened. All right, now we start to get to the flying dinosaurs, the pterosaurs. And we see lots of them in the fossil record, 252 to 201 million years ago. Pretty cool critters. Now, did they have these colors like that are in the picture right here? Nobody knows because fossils don't have colors, right? Because they're embedded in rock. But possibly they might have been this. That's from my husband. Possibly they did have colored skin. We're not quite sure, right? So it's just an artist's representation of what the pterosaurs might have looked like. We had lots of really thick and lush forests, and we had some little tiny mammals. Mammals are things like mice and rabbits and things like that. Squirrels, lots of squirrels. Lots of critters that were able to carry their young around internally and give birth to live young, as all animals do. We also started seeing these first flying dinosaurs. Jurassic, this is the famous one. Dun, dun, dun. 199 to 145 million years ago, that's when we see all of these crazy dinosaurs like the Brachiosaurs and the T-Rex and the bigger pterodactyls, all kinds of flowering plants, all kinds of bird fossils we see in the fossil record. So there's a whole lot of life going on during the Jurassic period. One of the cool critters that we think lived during the Jurassic period, we talked about him already, Archaeopteryx. So he was a little bit bigger than a chicken, but he could fly, and he looked a little bit like a reptile also. So he had feathers and wings, he had a tail, he had claws, and he looked a little bit like a kind of in-between cross between a bird and a reptile. So here is his fossil. Remember, this is the one that the farmer found in his field and got lots of cash for. So that's Archaeopteryx. Now here's a little fun fact for you. Remember the long necks from that cartoon, The Land Before Time? They're called Brachiosaurs. And in all the pictures, you see the Brachiosaur with this really long neck. There you go. See him right there? He's got this long neck. But here's the deal with Brachiosaurs. They couldn't have actually reached up to get those star fruits because the way that their anatomy is, if they had put their head all the way up like that, if they had reached all the way to the top to get the star fruits, they would have passed out from the lack of blood pressure going to their head. Isn't that crazy? So the Brachiosaurs, instead of going up like this, probably walked with their necks out like this, which is kind of cool to think about. So how do we know that? Because we look at their skeleton, and what scientists know about the anatomy of critters that are alive today, they reconstructed what this guy would look like, and they decided that there was absolutely no way that the weight of the neck and head of this guy would allow him to put his head straight up in the air and reach for a fruit. He had to kind of walk like this, which I think is kind of neat that we know that enough about the anatomy, and it also debunks all those awesome cartoons you guys loved when you were kids. They did not reach up to get the star fruit and all that kind of stuff. They would have passed out, which would have been quite a sight for sure. All right, the T-Rex, the famous T-Rex. Dun, dun, dun. So T-Rex, as you know, had some issues with his little shorty arms, right? So he couldn't really grasp anything. He couldn't hold anything and eat it because his arms were too short to reach his mouth. And so why did he have those arms? Like, what was the point of having these short little nubby arms when you couldn't even do anything with them? Well, scientists think that possibly the T-Rex used those arms for grasping during mating. What? Little PG-13 action going on for you guys. Yep, that's probably why they have those short little arms that don't have anything to do with eating or fighting. They were probably used in mating to grasp their mate. So there you go. The T-Rex. All right, Cretaceous Period is up next. 145. Now we're getting more modern to 65 million years ago. So now we have modern insects that are alive now that we were finding in the fossil record back then. We also then see in this group of fossils a huge mass extinction. Killed off every single dinosaur except the small little ones that might have become birds over time, and most of the reptiles. So we had a whole bunch of cool things going on in the fossil record, and then in the next one up, boom, almost everything was gone. So kind of crazy. That's the end of the Cretaceous period. The Cenozoic era, which is what we're currently in, shows globally lots of mammals, lots of insects, lots of flowering plants all over the world. And so we are currently in the Cenozoic era. Now here's a big question. Could we bring the dinosaurs back like in Jurassic Park? I'm going to have a couple questions for you on this. So check out this video about a couple of scientists that are actually considering, is this possible, and could we and should we do it? This is a 60 minutes special right here. Because we got advertising.
We just had the most amazing family vacation.
This is so exciting!
It's difficult to imagine that 10,000 years ago, right here in North America, there lived giant animals that are now the stuff of legends. Mammoths and mastodons, ground sloths, and saber-toothed cats. They and thousands of other species have vanished from the earth, and today, partly due to the expansion of one species, ours, animals are going extinct faster than ever before. The very definition of extinct means gone forever. But what if that didn't have to be? As we first reported in early 2010, scientists are making remarkable advances that are bringing us closer than ever before to the possibility of a true animal resurrection.
The story will continue in a moment.
Who wouldn't be dazzled by an animal like this, the woolly mammoth, or the saber-toothed tiger, the Irish elk, the giant sloth? Today they exist just as bones in museums, alive only in our imaginations and the recreations of artists and filmmakers. But what if that could change? In the age of DNA, we now know that these vanished creatures, like all life on Earth, are ultimately nothing more than this: sequences of the 4 letters A, C, T, and G that make up the genetic blueprint or code of life. The codes for extinct animals were thought to have died along with them until recently, when machines like this one at the Smithsonian's DNA lab started working magic.
Just the study of ancient DNA only broke onto the scene 20 years ago or so. The idea that we could harvest DNA from extinct creatures, from fossil bones, learn something about the past.
Sean Carroll, a professor of molecular biology and genetics at the University of Wisconsin, says that like so many things in the field of DNA, the progress has been staggering. One surprising discovery has been the value of ancient hair. Scientists recently discovered that the hair shaft seals DNA inside it like a biological plastic, protecting it and making hair a rich and plentiful source of genetic information. Does that mean that you can take extinct animals? I mean, there's hair in museums,
right? Yeah.
And get the genetic sequencing.
Possibly, and especially if those animals were preserved in any way, there's a good prospect of that. It's sort of like CSI. You know, how good is this forensic material? Can you get good DNA information from older and older and older material? That's pretty promising.
So dusty old specimens that have been tucked away in the drawers of natural history museums like the Smithsonian are suddenly potential treasure troves of genetic information. Just a couple of years ago, using only a few clumps of woolly mammoth hair, scientists at Penn State were able to extract enough DNA fragments to figure out most of its genetic sequence, making the woolly mammoth the first extinct animal to have its genome decoded. Which raises the question of whether resurrecting one of these creatures is really possible. Scientists say one option would be genetic engineering. Take a living animal that's related to the mammoth, like the elephant, figure out all the places where its DNA differs from the mammoth's, and then alter the elephant's DNA to make it match. That's not possible just yet. But there may be another way: cloning. Is it possible that we're going to get the full DNA of the woolly mammoth and be able to clone it?
Yes, I think we'll be able to get much, if not all, of the woolly mammoth DNA. And the great advantage there is that a lot of the specimens are in permafrost, so they've sort of been conveniently frozen for us, which preserves DNA, preserves tissue better.
But for cloning, just knowing the DNA sequence from hair isn't enough. You'd need an intact mammoth cell, which Carroll says will be difficult to find, but not impossible.
It could be a skin cell, it could be any particular cell that hopefully has been preserved well enough, stayed frozen for thousands of years, and to transfer the nucleus of that cell into, for example, an egg of an elephant.
And they're close.
Close enough that maybe the elephant could serve as a surrogate mother.
It's called interspecies cloning, implanting DNA from one species into the eggs of another. And anyone who wants to try it with a mammoth or anything else would be well served to pay a visit to Dr. Betsy Dresser in New Orleans. Tucked away on 1,200 acres of land that seem part Serengeti, part high-tech medical facility, she and her staff at the Audubon Nature Institute have been working quietly for years on the science and the art of interspecies cloning. And she'll be the first to tell you that even with living animals, it isn't easy.
You don't just clone some cells and then all of a sudden you have a baby.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many scientific steps along the way, knowing everything from hormones to the proper surrogate to, length of pregnancy.
Length of pregnancy.
Yeah, because see, we don't know how long a woolly mammoth, the gestation period. We can guess, but we don't know really.
But Betsy Dresser's work on interspecies cloning is focused on the future, not the past. Rather than trying to resurrect extinct creatures, her goal is to keep the animals we have today from going extinct tomorrow.
I feel like we're in the emergency room of the wildlife business, really. I don't want to see elephants in textbooks or, the way we see dinosaurs. We're going to lose a lot of species if we don't do something about it.
Dresser and her team are trying to increase the populations of endangered animals by putting their DNA into the eggs of their non-endangered relatives.
And this cat's going to act as a surrogate mother. And so here's the surgery.
On the day we visited, they were laparoscopically removing eggs from an ordinary house cat, then sending the eggs down the hall to have the house cat DNA literally sucked out of them. Oh, tell me what's happening.
What she's doing is she's removing the DNA from this domestic cat egg.
Wow.
And she can see it by what we call fluorescing it. It becomes just very blue. And so now she knows where it is, and now you'll see her go in there and be able to remove it.
She's taking out all the genes.
Right.
Once the house cat DNA is out, that's it being deposited outside of the egg. They will replace it with the DNA of an endangered Arabian sandcat, a completely different species gathered from a tiny piece of skin.
And there you see it being inserted into the domestic cat egg.
And you made that from just skin?
Just from skin cells, right.
An electrical pulse starts the egg dividing, and if all goes as planned, the now sandcat embryo will be put back into the domestic cat to grow to term. It's worked before with African wildcats. These two are both interspecies clones, so normal they even mated the old-fashioned way and produced kittens.
8 kittens altogether. We had a couple litters.
And they're totally healthy, and they're African wildcats.
Totally African wildcats, totally healthy. And it said to us, hey, this works. And now that we know we can do it, we can say to the world, these animals do develop, they do reproduce naturally, and we can use this as a tool for endangered species.
Is she hissing at us?
Yeah, she's hissing at us.
And Dresser is working her way up. Her next interspecies cloning project will use this non-endangered caracal cat as a surrogate mother for an endangered lynx. And after that, the eland antelope as a surrogate for its endangered cousin, the bongo. You know, there are still people who get nervous at the idea of cloning. They think there's something wrong about it.
And I'll tell you what, if I have to choose cloning or extinction, I'm going to choose cloning. But I want to be darn sure that I know how to do it. And if we don't do it while we have the animals now to be able to learn how to do it, then we're not going to have a choice. It's not going to be an option.
So to keep her options open while she's mastering interspecies cloning, she's also putting as many animals as she can on ice. Literally. Dresser is the keeper of a new kind of zoo, a frozen zoo, where she's collecting tiny skin samples from thousands of different animals representing hundreds of species, and is storing them at 343 degrees below zero in tiny canisters inside these tanks filled with liquid nitrogen.
We've got lions and tigers, we've got gorillas and rhinos, we've got little frogs, all of the animals that people know in zoos.
From this size to this size.
To this size, exactly.
So how long can a piece of skin be viable?
We think these cells can sit here for hundreds, maybe thousands of years.
So if any one of these animals were to go extinct, you could bring them back.
In theory, I believe we can.
In other words, it's kind of a Noah's Ark.
Yeah.
It's not a zoo, it's an ark.
It's an ark, truly.
Do you think we're at the stage where we should be taking every single wild animal, even if they're not endangered, and putting them in a frozen zoo?
Yes, I absolutely do.
Every single one.
What have we got to lose? I think we should put every species in that we can while we have the opportunity. Which raises the question, with so many living animals today threatened, why think about resurrecting extinct ones like the mammoth?
To bring the woolly mammoth back, I mean, we don't have enough space for the big animals we already have.
These projects like the Woolly Mammoth, they inspire people to think about the meaning of what we're doing here. And why would you invest years and years of your life in trying to bring back a woolly mammoth or taking care of them if you did?
That's an excellent question.
I think it would fire up people's imaginations. And I think there's a 9-year-old girl watching this program and listening to this saying, that's what I want to do. I want to bring back these creatures that are extinct, or I want to protect creatures that are now threatened from going extinct. So in many ways, I think the woolly mammoth can sort of be a poster animal for a general effort of being more conscious of our activities on the planet.
No one has yet found the intact cell it would take to resurrect that poster animal. But in Siberia 4 years ago, a reindeer herder discovered a remarkably well-preserved 1-month-old baby mammoth that had lain frozen in permafrost for 40,000 years. Its DNA was in better shape than any previously found, raising hopes that between new finds and new technology, it may just be a matter of time. Betsy Dresser stepped down as director of the Audubon Research Center recently to work on a book about endangered species and new technology. She continues to consult on the center's work, which is ongoing.
All right, so what do you think? Yes, we can probably do this, but the bigger question is not can we, but should we? So you got two different viewpoints there for using cloning. One to resurrect extinct animals like the mammoth, bring them back from extinction after they've left the fossil record, or to preserve the animals that are going extinct currently. So think about that. It's kind of a cool technology either way. So that's it for your dino presentation. See you later.